For 8 years, she sat by the entrance of Fort Mitchell Army Base, her weathered hands clutching a cardboard sign that read, "Veteran, anything helps." Soldiers walked past without looking. Base security treated her like a nuisance, and locals complained she was bringing down property values. Then 3 generals stepped out of a black sedan, walked directly to her, and saluted with tears in their eyes. Sarah Mitchell had been a fixture at the base's main gate, longer than most of the current personnel had been stationed there. Every morning at 0600 hours, she would position herself on the public sidewalk, just outside the security checkpoint, settling into the same spot with military precision. Her routine never varied: a small camping chair, a faded green duffel bag, and that handwritten sign that had weathered countless storms. The woman appeared to be in her 50s, though the harsh realities of street life had aged her beyond her years. Her graying hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore layers of mismatched clothing that seemed to change with the seasons but never looked quite clean. Most distinctive was her old military jacket, olive drab with patches so faded they were barely recognizable. The name tape had long since been removed, leaving only ghost marks where it once proudly displayed her identity. Sarah's daily presence became as predictable as the changing of the guard. She would arrive before dawn, settling into her chair as the first shift of soldiers began their day. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and even then, her responses were brief and measured. When soldiers occasionally dropped coins or small bills into the coffee can at her feet, she would nod respectfully and offer a quiet "thank you" that carried the unmistakable cadence of military training. The base community had mixed reactions to Sarah's persistent presence. Some younger soldiers, fresh from basic training, would snicker as they passed, making crude jokes about her appearance or speculating about what had led to her current circumstances. Others, particularly the non-commissioned officers who had served longer, would occasionally stop to chat briefly or offer her a hot cup of coffee from the base exchange. But for the most part, she had become part of the landscape, noticed but not truly seen. Fort Mitchell's commanding officers had initially tried to move Sarah along, citing regulations about loitering near military installations. However, since she remained on public property and never caused any actual disturbances, their legal options were limited. After several unsuccessful attempts to relocate her, they eventually adopted a policy of benign neglect, instructing security personnel to monitor her, but not to engage unless she created problems. The local community of Millbrook, the small town that had grown up around the base, was less tolerant of Sarah's presence. Town council meetings frequently featured complaints from business owners and residents who felt that having a homeless person so visible near the base entrance was hurting their image and potentially their economy. Patricia Hendricks, who owned a small cafe frequented by off-duty soldiers, was particularly vocal in her opposition. "She's driving away customers," Patricia would complain to anyone who would listen. "People see her there when they're driving to my restaurant, and it makes them think twice about stopping. It's not good for business, and it's not good for our community's reputation." The local sheriff, Deputy William Torres, had received numerous calls about Sarah over the years. However, after several conversations with her, he had concluded that she wasn't breaking any laws or causing any real harm. She was always respectful, never aggressive, and despite her circumstances, she maintained a certain dignity that he found admirable. Still, the political pressure from the town council meant he had to make regular visits to check on her, more for show than for any legitimate law enforcement purpose. Sarah's routine extended beyond simply sitting by the gate. She had developed an intricate knowledge of the base's operational schedule, though she never seemed to use this information for anything other than her own survival. She knew which shifts were most likely to offer spare change, which security guards were friendliest, and which times of day offered the best opportunities for finding discarded food or useful items. On particularly cold mornings, She would wrap herself in a heavy blanket that looked like it might have military origins, though it was too worn to identify definitively. During rainstorms, she would take shelter under a small overhang near the bus stop, but she always returned to her post as soon as the weather cleared. Her dedication to maintaining her position was remarkable, almost as if she were standing guard herself. The soldiers who passed her daily began to notice patterns in her behavior that suggested a military background. She would occasionally straighten her posture when officers passed, and her few interactions with military personnel were marked by an automatic deference that seemed ingrained rather than learned. Some of the more observant personnel noted that she appeared to recognize rank insignia and would adjust her demeanor accordingly, though she never made any explicit claims about her own service. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a 30-year veteran who had served multiple deployments, was one of the few people who regularly engaged Sarah in conversation. He would often stop during his morning run to check on her, bringing her coffee or a breakfast sandwich from the base commissary. During these brief exchanges, he noticed that Sarah's knowledge of military culture went far beyond what a civilian might pick up from casual observation. "She knows things," Rodriguez would tell his wife over dinner. "The way she talks about different bases, different units, it's not the kind of knowledge you get from watching movies or reading books. But whenever I try to ask her directly about her service, she gets quiet and changes the subject." The mystery of Sarah's background became something of a topic of speculation among the base personnel. Some believed she was a veteran who had fallen on hard times, while others thought she might be the family member of someone who had served. A few cynical voices suggested she was simply a con artist who had learned enough military terminology to seem authentic. However, none of these theories explained her unwavering commitment to her post or the sense of purpose that seemed to drive her daily routine. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a psychiatrist who worked with veterans at the nearby VA hospital, had encountered Sarah on several occasions when she visited the base for consultations. She observed that Sarah exhibited many of the behavioral patterns common among veterans dealing with trauma and displacement, but without being able to speak with her professionally, she could only speculate about her background. "There's something about her bearing," Dr. Walsh noted in her private observations. "Even in her current circumstances, there's a discipline and awareness that suggests significant military training. But there's also a guardedness that suggests she's protecting herself from something or someone." The years passed, and Sarah's presence became so routine that she was almost invisible to the daily flow of military life. New soldiers would arrive, serve their tours, and transfer to other assignments, while Sarah remained constant. She weathered budget cuts that reduced base personnel, survived changes in command, and adapted to new security protocols without ever seeming to be directly affected by the military bureaucracy that surrounded her. Local charitable organizations had tried to reach out to Sarah multiple times over the years, offering services ranging from temporary shelter to job training programs. However, she consistently declined their assistance, always politely but firmly. She seemed to have her own support network, though no one could identify exactly what it was or how it functioned. The local VA representative, Marcus Thompson, had made several attempts to determine if Sarah was eligible for veterans benefits, but without proper identification or willingness to engage with the system, his efforts had been unsuccessful. He suspected that she might be dealing with issues that made it difficult for her to trust official institutions, but he couldn't force her to accept help she didn't want. As Sarah's 8th year at the gate approached, her routine remained unchanged, but subtle signs suggested that her health might be declining. She seemed more tired than usual, and her interactions with the few people who regularly spoke with her became even more brief. However, she continued to maintain her post with the same dedication that had defined her presence for nearly a decade. Base personnel who had grown accustomed to her presence began to worry about what might happen if she became unable to continue her routine. However, None of them could have predicted that her long vigil was about to come to an end in the most unexpected way imaginable. Sarah's position at the base gate offered her a perfect view of the daily rhythm of military life, but what the passing soldiers didn't realize was that her presence there served a purpose far beyond simple panhandling. From her weathered camping chair, she could observe everything: the shift changes, the visitor protocols, the delivery schedules, and most importantly, the people who didn't quite belong. "Rough night?" Rodriguez asked, offering her a steaming cup of coffee from the base exchange. He had been bringing her coffee twice a week for over 3 years, but this morning felt different somehow. Sarah accepted the cup with her usual quiet. "Thanks," but he noticed her hands were steadier than most people living rough, and her eyes held a sharpness that didn't match her circumstances. Sarah looked up from her notebook, and for a moment, Rodriguez saw something flicker across her face. A momentary dropping of whatever mask she wore daily. "Just thinking about things," she said, her voice carrying an undertone he hadn't heard before. "About choices people make when they think nobody's watching." Rodriguez had been wondering about Sarah's background for years, but something about her tone this morning invited deeper conversation. "You know," he said carefully, "I've been watching you out here for a long time. You carry yourself different than most folks in your situation. Makes me wonder what your story really is." The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah seemed to weigh her response carefully. She closed her notebook and looked directly at Rodriguez, as if making a decision she had been avoiding for years. "Tell me something, Sergeant. When you were deployed, did you ever have to watch a position where you knew something bad might happen, but you couldn't do anything about it until it actually did?" Rodriguez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. The question was too specific, too professionally phrased to come from someone without military experience. "That's a very particular question for someone to ask," he replied slowly. "Yeah, I've been in that position. Overwatch duty, mostly. You sit there and you watch, and you hope nothing happens, but you stay ready because you know it might." Sarah nodded, her expression growing more serious. "That's what I've been doing for 8 years, watching, waiting, hoping I'm wrong about what I think is coming." She gestured toward the base entrance, where the morning shift change was beginning. "This place, this base, it's not as secure as everyone thinks it is, and there are people who know that." The words hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. He had suspected Sarah might be a veteran, but this was something else entirely. "What exactly are you telling me?" he asked, his voice dropping to the tone he used when discussing classified matters. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching a delivery truck pass through the security checkpoint. "My daughter Emma is a freshman at Millbrook High School," she said finally. "She thinks I work as a security consultant for a private firm. She has no idea I spend my days sitting outside a military base looking like I'm homeless." Rodriguez felt the pieces beginning to fall into place, but the picture they formed was more complex than anything he had imagined. "You're not homeless," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Sarah confirmed. "I have a house about 10 miles from here. I drive to work every morning, just like everyone else. The difference is that my work requires me to look like someone nobody would suspect of being a trained intelligence operative." The revelation hit Rodriguez like a thunderbolt. Sarah wasn't just a veteran. She was an active intelligence professional conducting some kind of long-term surveillance operation. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" he asked. Sarah's expression grew distant, as if she were calculating. "How much to reveal?" "I spent 15 years in military intelligence before transitioning to civilian contracting. The agency I work for specializes in long-term security assessments for high-value targets. Fort Mitchell has been my assignment for the past 8 years." Rodriguez struggled to process what he was hearing. "You're telling me you've been conducting surveillance on our base for 8 years while pretending to be homeless?" "Not surveillance of the base," Sarah corrected. "Surveillance for the base. There's a difference." I'm not gathering intelligence on Fort Mitchell's operations. I'm watching for threats against Fort Mitchell's operations. The distinction was crucial, and Rodriguez understood the implications immediately. Counter-surveillance, he said. You're the early warning system, Sarah nodded. There have been credible threats against this installation for years. Nothing that reached the level of requiring visible security increases, but enough to justify having someone in position to spot advance reconnaissance or preparation for potential attacks. The conversation was interrupted by a group of junior enlisted personnel walking past, and Sarah immediately slipped back into her homeless persona, shoulders slumped, eyes downcast, the transformation so complete that Rodriguez almost doubted what he had just heard. Only when the soldiers were out of earshot did she resume her normal bearing. The town council meeting next month, Rodriguez said, understanding dawning in his voice. They're going to try to force you out of position just when you might be needed most. Sarah's expression confirmed his suspicions. Intelligence suggests that potential threats have been conducting their own surveillance of this base's security protocols. They've been watching the response to civilian complaints about my presence, and they're counting on the political pressure to remove me from my observation post. Rodriguez felt a surge of anger at the irony of the situation. So the same people who are complaining about your presence are actually helping potential threats by trying to blind our security. That's one way to look at it, Sarah agreed. But they don't know what they're doing. To them, I'm just a homeless woman who makes them uncomfortable. They have no idea that removing me could compromise 8 years of intelligence gathering about potential threats to this installation. The weight of what Sarah was telling him settled over Rodriguez like a heavy blanket. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. You've kept this secret for 8 years. Why break cover now? Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. Because I need someone inside the base who understands what's really happening. Someone who can watch for the signs I've been tracking. And who can respond appropriately if I'm forced to abandon my position. Rodriguez understood the gravity of what she was asking. You want me to be your backup? I want you to be ready, Sarah corrected. I've identified 3 specific threat indicators that could signal an imminent attack on this installation. If you start seeing those indicators after I'm gone, you'll need to alert base security immediately. The morning was growing warmer, and more personnel were beginning to move through the base entrance. Sarah pulled a small piece of paper from her pocket and handed it to Rodriguez. Memorize this information, then destroy it. These are the specific things to watch for. Rodriguez looked at the paper, noting the precise military terminology and a level of detail that only someone with extensive intelligence training could have compiled. This is professional-level threat assessment, he said. It should be. Sarah replied. It's taken me 8 years to develop this intelligence picture. I've identified potential approach routes, likely timing windows, and probable methods of attack. All of that information disappears if I'm forced to abandon my position. The conversation was approaching a natural conclusion as the morning shift. Change brought increased activity around the base entrance. Rodriguez folded the paper and put it in his pocket, understanding that he now carried a responsibility he had never expected. One more thing, Sarah said as Rodriguez prepared to leave. Emma thinks I'm going to be promoted to a desk job soon. She's been asking when I can start working normal hours like other parents. I've been telling her it might be soon. Rodriguez understood the subtext. Sarah was preparing for the possibility that her cover would be blown and her long-term mission would end. Are you ready for that? He asked. Sarah looked toward the base entrance, where the flag was being raised for the morning colors ceremony. I've been ready for 8 years, she said. The question is whether Fort Mitchell is ready for what comes next. Colonel Morrison called an emergency assembly of all base personnel, where he delivered the shocking news about Sarah's real identity and mission. The silence that followed his announcement was deafening, broken only by the sound of grown soldiers, struggling to process the magnitude of what they had learned. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been Sarah's most consistent supporter, felt a complex mixture of vindication and sorrow as he realized the full scope of her sacrifice. The base's intelligence officer, Major Chun, immediately began implementing new security protocols to compensate for the loss of Sarah's surveillance capabilities. Her analysis revealed that Fort Mitchell had been operating under a protective umbrella for 8 years without anyone realizing it, and the challenge of replacing Sarah's intelligence gathering would require a complete overhaul of their security. Assessment procedures. Patricia Hendricks received the news about Sarah's true identity through a phone call from Deputy Torres, who felt compelled to personally inform the woman who had led the campaign against her. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, but Patricia's life was forever changed. She closed her cafe early that day and spent hours sitting alone, contemplating the profound injustice of her actions against someone who had been protecting her community. The town council held an emergency session that evening where Mayor Stevenson announced the truth about Sarah's identity to the shocked municipal leadership. The ordinances they had been preparing to pass against homeless individuals were immediately withdrawn, and the council voted unanimously to issue a formal apology to Sarah and her family. Emma Mitchell learned the truth about her mother's work when General Thompson and a team of family liaison officers visited her at the safe house where she had been staying. The revelation that her mother was not only still alive, but was actually a war hero, receiving the Medal of Honor, created a whirlwind of emotions that would take months to fully process. Dr. Walsh, the VA psychiatrist who had suspected Sarah's military background, felt a profound sense of professional vindication mixed with personal guilt. Her medical training had detected signs of Sarah's true identity, but she had been unable to act on her suspicions due to patient confidentiality concerns and Sarah's refusal to engage with VA services. The base's chaplain, Captain Martinez, organized a special service of thanksgiving and repentance, where military personnel and civilian community members gathered to acknowledge their failure to recognize Sarah's service and to commit to better supporting veterans in the future. The service was attended by over 500 people, making it one of the largest gatherings in Millbrook's history. The local media, which had initially covered Sarah's story as a simple homeless issue, found themselves scrambling to report on one of the most significant intelligence stories in recent military history. National news outlets picked up the story, and Sarah's 8-year vigil at Fort Mitchell became a symbol of unrecognized heroism and sacrifice. The Defense Intelligence Agency established the Colonel Sarah Mitchell Foundation, dedicated to supporting undercover operatives and their families who make extraordinary sacrifices for national security. The foundation's first initiative was to create a scholarship fund for military children whose parents serve in classified assignments that prevent normal family life. Fort Mitchell's base exchange was renamed the Colonel Sarah Mitchell Exchange, and a bronze statue was commissioned to honor her service. The statue would be placed at the exact spot where she had maintained her surveillance post for 8 years, serving as a permanent reminder of her dedication and sacrifice. The town of Millbrook underwent a profound cultural transformation as residents grappled with the implications of how they had treated Sarah. Community leaders implemented new programs to support veterans and homeless individuals, recognizing that their failure to see Sarah's true identity reflected broader problems in how society treats its most vulnerable members. Patricia Hendricks sold her cafe and used the proceeds to establish a veteran support center in downtown Millbrook. She dedicated the rest of her life to serving the military community, driven by a desperate need to atone for her treatment of Sarah. The center became a model for similar facilities across the country. The FBI launched an investigation into how terrorist operatives had been able to influence civilian complaints against Sarah, revealing a sophisticated campaign to use local politics as cover for intelligence operations. The investigation led to the arrest of several individuals who had been working to compromise military installation security. Emma Mitchell was invited to attend the Medal of Honor ceremony at the White House, where she would finally see her mother receive the recognition she deserved. The ceremony would be attended by military leadership from across the country, representing the thousands of service members whose lives Sarah had protected through her intelligence work. The military intelligence community began studying Sarah's methods and developing new training programs based on her techniques. Her ability to maintain cover while gathering critical intelligence became the gold standard for undercover operations at military installations worldwide. Master Sergeant Rodriguez was promoted to Sergeant Major and placed in charge of a new base security initiative that incorporated lessons learned from Sarah's 8-year surveillance operation. His relationship with Sarah had provided him with unique insights into intelligence gathering techniques that proved invaluable in his new role. The terrorist cell that had been planning to attack Fort Mitchell was finally apprehended based on intelligence Sarah had gathered during her final weeks at the base. The arrest prevented what security analysts later determined could have been the deadliest attack on a military installation since 9/11. The Congressional Medal of Honor Society invited Sarah to speak at their annual convention, where she would share her story with other recipients of the nation's highest military decoration. Her speech about the importance of recognizing service in all its forms became one of the most powerful addresses in the organization's history. The Department of Veterans Affairs used Sarah's story to launch a national campaign about recognizing and supporting veterans who may not fit traditional expectations. The campaign helped identify thousands of veterans who had been overlooked by existing support systems. Fort Mitchell established an annual recognition ceremony in Sarah's honor, where military personnel and civilian community members would gather to acknowledge the often invisible sacrifices made by intelligence operatives and their families. The ceremony became a pilgrimage site for military families affected by classified assignments. The town council passed a resolution declaring the spot where Sarah had maintained her surveillance post as a permanent memorial to unrecognized service members. The memorial includes a plaque with Sarah's words, "Sometimes the greatest service is the service that goes unseen." Sarah's story became required reading at military academies and intelligence training schools, where her 8-year assignment was studied as an example of exceptional dedication and professional excellence. Future generations of intelligence operatives would learn from her techniques and be inspired by her sacrifice. The community of Millbrook implemented new policies requiring consultation with veterans organizations before making any decisions affecting individuals who might be former service members. The policies were designed to prevent future incidents where actual veterans might be mistreated due to assumptions about their circumstances. The ripple effects of Sarah's story extended far beyond Fort Mitchell and Millbrook, inspiring communities across the country to examine their own treatment of veterans and homeless individuals. Her legacy became a catalyst for broader social change in how society recognizes and supports those who have served their country. The Defense Intelligence Agency declassified portions of Sarah's intelligence reports, revealing the scope of threats she had identified and the attacks she had prevented. The declassified material demonstrated that her 8-year assignment had been one of the most successful intelligence operations in recent military history. Sarah's daughter Emma eventually followed in her mother's footsteps, joining the Army and specializing in intelligence work. Her decision to serve was motivated by her mother's example and her desire to continue the family tradition of protecting fellow service members through dedication and sacrifice. 6 months after the Medal of Honor ceremony at the White House, Sarah Mitchell stood before a gathering of over 3,000 military personnel, intelligence operatives, and civilian leaders at the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes. The woman who had once been dismissed as a homeless nuisance now commanded the attention of the nation's most senior defense officials as she prepared to deliver the keynote address for the inaugural National Intelligence Recognition Day. The religious community's response to Sarah's story had created new theological discussions about the nature of service and sacrifice in modern society. Seminaries across denominational lines incorporated Sarah's story into their curricula, using her experience to explore themes of hidden service, community responsibility, and the spiritual dimensions of protecting others. The Sarah Mitchell Institute for Civic Engagement had become a model for community-based programs that identified and supported local heroes. The Institute's methodology had been adopted by over 1,000 communities worldwide, creating networks of support that extended far beyond veterans to include teachers, healthcare workers, social workers, and other individuals who served their communities in ways that often went unrecognized. The transformation of Millbrook had become a case study in community redemption and growth that was studied by urban planners and sociologists worldwide. The town's journey from rejecting Sarah to celebrating her service had been documented in numerous academic studies and had inspired similar transformations in communities around the world. The Sarah Mitchell Memorial Complex at Fort Mitchell had grown from a simple statue to a comprehensive museum and education center that attracted over 500,000 visitors annually. The complex included interactive exhibits that helped visitors understand the challenges faced by intelligence operatives and their families, as well as programs that encouraged community engagement and support for veterans. The continuing declassification of Sarah's intelligence reports had revealed the full scope of her 8-year assignment and its impact on national security. The declassified material showed that her work had prevented not only the planned attack on Fort Mitchell, but also a coordinated series of attacks that could have been devastating to military installations across the southeastern United States. Sarah Mitchell Scholarship Program had evolved into a comprehensive educational initiative that provided support for over 10,000 students annually. The program's recipients, known as Mitchell Scholars, were required to commit to careers in public service, ensuring that Sarah's legacy of dedication continued through future generations of Americans committed to serving their communities and nation. The annual Sarah Mitchell Recognition Ceremony had become one of the most important events in the international military calendar, drawing attendees from around the world who came to honor not only Sarah's service, but also the thousands of other intelligence operatives who serve in classified assignments. The ceremony had become a powerful symbol of international cooperation and shared commitment to protecting those who serve in the shadows. The Sarah Mitchell effect had fundamentally altered how societies worldwide understood and honored service in all its forms. Her story had become a catalyst for examining how communities recognize and support their heroes, challenging assumptions about service, sacrifice, and the diverse ways that individuals contribute to the common good. The legacy of Colonel Sarah Mitchell continued to inspire new generations of individuals to serve their communities and nations with dedication and humility. Her 8-year vigil at Fort Mitchell had become more than a story of individual heroism. It had become a symbol of the potential for ordinary individuals to make extraordinary contributions to the security and well-being of others. The ongoing impact of Sarah's story demonstrated the power of individual dedication to inspire global change, creating a more inclusive and comprehensive approach to recognizing the diverse forms that heroism can take. Her story served as a constant reminder that true heroes often serve in silence, protecting and serving others without seeking recognition or reward, and that communities worldwide have a responsibility to recognize and support these hidden champions of freedom and security. Today, Sarah Mitchell lives quietly in Virginia with her daughter Emma, who now serves as a major in military intelligence. But Sarah's story didn't end with her Medal of Honor ceremony. It began a revolution. Every morning at 0800 hours, in cities across America and around the world, ordinary people take positions at bus stops, park benches, and street corners, Their teachers monitoring school safety, veterans watching over community centers, and retired nurses keeping vigil at hospitals. They call themselves Sarah's Sentinels, hidden heroes inspired by one woman's 8-year vigil. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation now operates in 94 countries, having identified over 2 million hidden heroes worldwide. From the grandmother in Detroit who sits outside her neighborhood school to protect children, to the former Marine in Tokyo who monitors the subway system for suspicious activity, Sarah's legacy lives on in countless acts of quiet heroism. But perhaps the most powerful legacy is this: communities now look twice before judging those who seem different. That homeless veteran on the corner, the quiet woman at the bus stop, the elderly man who sits in the same place every day. They might just be heroes in disguise. Sarah's 8-year sacrifice taught us that heroism doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a medal. Sometimes it sits on a folding chair with a cardboard sign, protecting us all. Have you ever encountered a hidden hero in your community? Someone whose true story might surprise you? Share their story in the comments below. You never know whose life might be changed by recognizing the heroes among us. If Sarah's story inspired you to look at your community differently, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We share stories of hidden heroes every week because everyone deserves to have their service recognized. Remember, heroes walk among us every day. We just need to learn how to see them. The continuing impact of Sarah's story demonstrates the power of individual dedication to inspire broad social change. Her 8-year vigil at Fort Mitchell has become a catalyst for examining how communities recognize and support their heroes, challenging assumptions about service, sacrifice, and the diverse ways that individuals contribute to the common good. The legacy of Colonel Sarah Mitchell continues to grow, inspiring new generations of Americans to look beyond surface appearances and recognize the heroes who serve in their midst. Her story has become a permanent part of American culture, ensuring that the lessons of her sacrifice will continue to inspire and guide communities for generations to come. The Sarah Mitchell effect has fundamentally altered how America understands and honors military service, creating a more inclusive and comprehensive approach to recognizing the diverse forms that heroism can take. Her story serves as a constant reminder that true heroes often serve in silence, protecting and serving others without seeking recognition or reward, and that communities have a responsibility to recognize and support these hidden champions of freedom and security. The global transformation inspired by Sarah Mitchell's story reached unprecedented heights 5 years after her Medal of Honor ceremony, when the United Nations General Assembly unanimously passed Resolution 2847, officially designating October 15th as International Hidden Heroes Day. The resolution, sponsored by 47 nations, recognized that Sarah's 8-year vigil had illuminated a universal truth about unrecognized service that transcended national boundaries and cultural differences. Secretary General Maria Santos delivered the keynote address at the UN ceremony, stating that Sarah's story had awakened the world's conscience to the reality that true heroism often wears the mask of ordinary struggle. The ceremony was attended by representatives from 193 nations, many of whom shared stories of their own hidden heroes who had been inspired by Sarah's example to continue their quiet service to humanity. The European Union established the Sarah Mitchell Protocol for supporting undercover operatives, creating the first international framework for protecting intelligence personnel and their families across member nations. The protocol included provisions for healthcare, education, and psychological support that could be accessed without compromising operational security, addressing systemic problems that had been identified through Sarah's experience. The World Health Organization launched the Hidden Heroes Mental Health Initiative, recognizing that individuals who serve in classified or undercover capacities face unique psychological challenges that require specialized treatment approaches. The initiative was funded through a $500 million commitment from member nations, with treatment protocols developed based on research conducted with Sarah's cooperation and input. The Vatican's recognition of Sarah's service marked a significant moment in the intersection of faith and military service. Pope Francis personally invited Sarah to address the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, where she spoke about the spiritual dimensions of serving in anonymity and the fervor in anonymity, and the importance of faith in sustaining individuals through extended periods of isolation and misunderstanding. The Olympic Committee created the Hidden Heroes Award, presented every 4 years to individuals who have demonstrated extraordinary dedication to protecting others while serving in anonymity. Sarah was the first recipient of this honor, accepting the award on behalf of intelligence operatives worldwide, who could not be publicly recognized for their contributions to global security. The Sarah Mitchell Global Foundation had grown into one of the world's largest organizations supporting military families and intelligence operatives. With operations in 73 countries, the foundation provided services ranging from emergency financial assistance to specialized education programs for children of intelligence personnel. The foundation's annual budget exceeded $2 billion, funded through government contracts, private donations, and corporate partnerships. The transformation of intelligence training worldwide reflected Sarah's influence on professional development in the field. The International Intelligence Academy, established in Geneva with support from NATO allies, used Sarah's methods as the foundation for training programs that prepared operatives for long-term assignments requiring deep community integration. Graduates of the Academy were known as Mitchell Fellows, carrying forward her legacy of professional excellence and personal sacrifice. The diplomatic community embraced Sarah's story as a powerful tool for international cooperation and understanding. The U.S. State Department's cultural exchange programs featured Sarah's story in presentations to foreign audiences, demonstrating American values of service and sacrifice. These programs had been particularly effective in building relationships with allied nations whose own intelligence services had adopted Sarah's techniques. The corporate world's response to Sarah's story continued to evolve with the creation of the Hidden Heroes Business Alliance, a consortium of Fortune 500 companies committed to hiring and supporting veterans with intelligence backgrounds. The alliance had created over 100,000 jobs for veterans, with participating companies reporting that former intelligence operatives brought unique problem-solving skills and security awareness to their organizations. The entertainment industry's portrayal of Sarah's story had evolved beyond simple biographical accounts to include educational content that helped audiences understand the broader implications of her experience. The Sarah Mitchell documentary series, produced by the History Channel, explored the experiences of other intelligence operatives who had been inspired by her example to share their own stories of service and sacrifice. The academic study of Sarah's case had generated over 500 scholarly articles and 15 books, creating a substantial body of research on topics ranging from the psychology of long-term undercover operations to the sociology of community recognition and support. The Sarah Mitchell Research Institute at Harvard University had become the premier center for studying the intersection of national security, community engagement, and social justice. The legal profession's response to Sarah's story had led to significant reforms in how intelligence operatives and their families were protected under the law. The Sarah Mitchell Act, passed by Congress with bipartisan support, created new legal protections for intelligence personnel and established procedures for providing legal assistance to operatives whose cover had been compromised or whose families faced legal challenges related to classified service. The medical community's understanding of the health challenges faced by intelligence operatives had been revolutionized by research conducted in collaboration with Sarah and other former operatives. The Mitchell Protocol for treating intelligence-related PTSD had been adopted by VA hospitals nationwide and had been shared with medical communities in allied nations, improving care for thousands of former operatives. The technology sector's contribution to supporting hidden heroes had resulted in innovative solutions that addressed the unique challenges faced by intelligence operatives and their families. The Secure Connect platform, developed by a consortium of technology companies, provided encrypted communication tools that allowed operatives to maintain contact with their families while preserving operational security. The transformation of military culture inspired by Sarah's story had led to fundamental changes in how the armed forces recognized and supported personnel in classified assignments. The Department of Defense had established the Office of Hidden Heroes, a dedicated organization responsible for ensuring that the needs of intelligence operatives and their families were addressed throughout their careers and into retirement. The international military community's embrace of Sarah's story had led to unprecedented cooperation in supporting intelligence operatives worldwide. The Allied Intelligence Support Network, established through NATO, created a framework for sharing resources and expertise in supporting operatives and their families across member nations. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a sociology professor at Georgetown University, conducted a comprehensive study of the Sarah Mitchell effect on American communities. Her research revealed that Sarah's story had fundamentally altered public perception of homelessness, mental health challenges, and the diverse ways that military service manifests in civilian life. The study documented measurable changes in community attitudes toward veterans, with significant increases in support for veterans programs and services. The ripple effects of Sarah's revelation extended into corporate America, where major employers began implementing new hiring practices specifically designed to identify and support veterans who might have been overlooked by traditional recruitment methods. Companies like Amazon, Google, and General Electric created special programs to recruit veterans with intelligence backgrounds, recognizing the unique skills and perspectives they brought to civilian careers. The entertainment industry embraced Sarah's story as a powerful narrative about hidden heroism and community responsibility. 3 major motion pictures were developed based on her experience, with proceeds designated for veteran support programs. The film's impact on public awareness was profound, reaching audiences who might never have otherwise learned about the challenges faced by intelligence operatives and their families. Educational institutions across the country integrated Sarah's story into their curricula, using her experience to teach lessons about civic responsibility, critical thinking, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Elementary schools created programs encouraging students to identify and support veterans in their communities, while high schools developed service learning projects focused on veterans issues. The Sarah Mitchell challenge became a viral social media phenomenon, encouraging people to share stories of hidden heroes in their own communities. The challenge raised awareness about the diverse forms that service and sacrifice can take, inspiring millions of people to recognize and support those who serve others without seeking recognition. International military academies began requiring study of Sarah's case as part of their leadership development programs. The Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, the French Military Academy at St. Cyr, and military institutions in over 20 countries incorporated her story into their training, recognizing its universal lessons about dedication, sacrifice, and the importance of protecting those who serve in classified assignments. The medical community responded to Sarah's story by developing new protocols for identifying and treating veterans who might be struggling with the psychological effects of classified assignments. The American Psychological Association created specialized training programs for therapists working with intelligence operatives and their families, addressing the unique challenges of maintaining mental health while serving in roles that prevent normal social connections. Religious organizations across Denominational lines embraced Sarah's story as a modern parable about service and recognition. Churches, synagogues, mosques, and other faith communities developed programs to identify and support veterans in their congregations, recognizing that military service often involves spiritual as well as physical sacrifice. The legal profession was transformed by Sarah's story, with law schools creating new courses on national security law and the rights of intelligence operatives. The American Bar Association developed pro bono programs specifically designed to assist veterans with legal issues related to classified service, recognizing that many legal challenges faced by intelligence operatives require specialized knowledge and security clearances. The technology industry leveraged Sarah's story to develop innovative solutions for supporting veterans and their families. Silicon Valley companies created apps and platforms designed to connect veterans with services, employment opportunities, and community support networks. These technological solutions were specifically designed to address the unique challenges faced by veterans whose service histories might be classified or difficult to verify. The Sarah Mitchell Memorial Highway System was established through congressional action, designating stretches of interstate highways near major military installations as memorial routes, honoring intelligence operatives and their families. The highway markers serve as permanent reminders of the sacrifices made by those who serve in classified assignments, ensuring that their contributions are never forgotten. The academic study of Sarah's case led to the development of new fields of research focused on the social psychology of hidden service and the community dynamics that affect recognition of diverse forms of heroism. Universities established research centers dedicated to studying the intersection of national security, community responsibility, and social justice. The Sarah Mitchell Institute for Community Engagement was created as a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping communities identify and support their own hidden heroes. The Institute's programs have been implemented in over 200 communities nationwide, creating networks of support that extend far beyond veterans to include teachers, healthcare workers, social workers, and other individuals who serve their communities in ways that often go unrecognized. The international diplomatic community embraced Sarah's story as an example of American values and commitment to honoring service in all its forms. The State Department incorporated her story into cultural exchange programs, using her experience to demonstrate American dedication to protecting and supporting those who serve their country in diverse and often invisible ways. National Security Agency declassified additional portions of Sarah's intelligence reports, revealing the full scope of threats she had identified and neutralized during her 8-year assignment. The declassified material demonstrated that her work had prevented not only the planned attack on Fort Mitchell, but also several other potential terrorist operations that could have affected military installations across the southeastern United States. The Sarah Mitchell Scholarship Program expanded to include partnerships with over 100 universities, providing full scholarships for students interested in careers in public service, military intelligence, and veteran support. The program's recipients, known as Mitchell Scholars, are required to commit to careers in public service, ensuring that Sarah's legacy of dedication continues through future generations. The transformation of Fort Mitchell into a model military installation attracted attention from defense officials worldwide. The base's community engagement programs, veteran support initiatives, and civilian-military cooperation became templates for military installations around the world, demonstrating how Sarah's story could inspire positive change in military communities globally. The Sarah Mitchell Center for Excellence in Intelligence Studies was established at the Central Intelligence Agency, where her methods and techniques are taught to future intelligence operatives. The center's curriculum emphasizes the importance of long-term strategic thinking, community integration, and the psychological resilience required for extended undercover assignments. The annual Sarah Mitchell Day of Service became a national observance, with communities across the country organizing volunteer activities focused on supporting veterans and their families. The Day of Service has become one of the largest volunteer mobilizations in American history, with millions of people participating in activities designed to honor and support those who have served their country. The Sarah Mitchell Foundation's international programs have extended her influence to military communities around the world. The Foundation's partnerships with NATO allies, the United Nations, and other international organizations have created a global network of support for military families affected by classified assignments. The transformation of Millbrook from a community that rejected Sarah to one that celebrates her service has become a model for community reconciliation and growth. The town's experience is now studied by urban planners, sociologists, and community development experts as an example of how communities can acknowledge their mistakes and work toward positive change. The Sarah Mitchell Archive at the National Archives preserves the complete record of her 8-year assignment, ensuring that future researchers and historians will have access to this remarkable story of service and sacrifice. The archive includes her intelligence reports, personal correspondence, and interviews with community members who were affected by her story. General Thompson's expression grew more solemn as he prepared to reveal the full scope of Sarah's identity and accomplishments. The leather briefcase he carried contained documents that would forever change how everyone at Fort Mitchell understood the woman they had known as a homeless veteran sitting outside their gate. Agent Sarah Mitchell's true identity goes far beyond her role as an intelligence operative. General Thompson began, his voice carrying the weight of revelations that had been classified at the highest levels for nearly 2 decades. She is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, United States Army, retired, and one of the most decorated female officers in modern military history. The impact of this revelation hit Colonel Morrison like a thunderbolt. Not only had Sarah been conducting intelligence operations, but she had outranked him during her active duty service. The woman who had been sitting outside his base in apparent destitution was actually a former colonel with a distinguished military career. General Crawford opened a thick file folder and began reading from Sarah's official service record. Colonel Mitchell graduated from West Point in 1995, ranking 3rd in her class. She served with distinction in Bosnia, Afghanistan, and Iraq, earning the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism under fire. The details of Sarah's combat record were staggering. She had led troops in some of the most dangerous missions of the past 3 decades, saving countless lives through her tactical brilliance and personal courage. Her service record included commendations from multiple NATO allies and recognition from the highest levels of military command. General Hayes revealed that Sarah's transition to intelligence work had been motivated by a specific incident during her final deployment. In 2008, Colonel Mitchell prevented a terrorist attack on a major military installation in Iraq by conducting a solo surveillance mission that lasted 6 months. Her success in that operation led to her recruitment for similar assignments in the United States. The psychological profile that had made Sarah perfect for her Fort Mitchell assignment was rooted in her combat experience, the generals explained. Her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, her tolerance for physical discomfort, and her capacity for long-term strategic thinking had all been proven in the crucible of actual warfare. Thompson pulled out a photograph that would shock everyone who had seen Sarah in her homeless disguise. The image showed a younger Sarah in full dress uniform, standing at attention with perfect military bearing. The contrast between this official portrait and the woman who had sat outside the base gate was almost impossible to reconcile. Colonel Mitchell's decision to volunteer for the Fort Mitchell assignment was deeply personal. General Crawford continued. Her younger brother, Lieutenant Michael Mitchell, was killed in Afghanistan in 2007 while serving with the 82nd Airborne Division. His death motivated her to dedicate her post-military career to protecting other service members. The revelation that Sarah's sacrifice had been motivated by the loss of her brother added another layer of tragedy to her story. For 8 years, she had been honoring her brother's memory by protecting the soldiers at Fort Mitchell, enduring public humiliation while secretly serving as their guardian angel. General Hayes revealed that Sarah's intelligence reports had been instrumental in preventing multiple terrorist attacks across the country. Her methods and insights have been incorporated into counter-terrorism training programs used by every branch of the military. Colonel Mitchell's work has literally saved thousands of lives. The scope of Sarah's impact extended far beyond Fort Mitchell, the generals explained. Her intelligence network had identified and disrupted terrorist cells in multiple states, and her analytical techniques had revolutionized how military installations assessed and responded to security threats. General Thompson revealed that Sarah's cover story had been so convincing that it had fooled even trained intelligence professionals. Several times over the past 8 years, other agencies have attempted to recruit or investigate the homeless woman outside Fort Mitchell, never realizing they were dealing with one of our most accomplished operatives. The personal cost of Sarah's assignment became more apparent as the generals revealed details about her living situation. While she had maintained a home for her daughter Emma, she had actually spent many nights sleeping in her car near the base to maintain her cover and ensure continuous surveillance of potential threats. General Crawford explained that Sarah's dedication to her mission had gone far beyond professional duty. Colonel Mitchell has donated her entire intelligence salary to veterans charities, living solely on her military pension while maintaining her cover. She has literally impoverished herself in service to her country. The financial sacrifice Sarah had made was staggering. As a retired colonel and active intelligence operative, she had been entitled to a comfortable income, but she had chosen to live as if she were actually homeless to maintain the authenticity of her cover. General Hayes revealed that Sarah's daughter, Emma, had been told that her mother worked as a security consultant, which was technically true, but concealed the extraordinary nature of her actual assignment. Colonel Mitchell has been preparing Emma for the possibility that her mother's work might require extended absences or relocation. The generals explained that Sarah's extraction from Fort Mitchell had been complicated by the need to protect her daughter from potential retaliation by hostile forces. Emma had been moved to a safe location while security analysts assessed the ongoing threat to the Mitchell family. General Thompson revealed that Sarah's intelligence work had identified a specific terrorist cell that had been planning an attack on Fort Mitchell for over 2 years. Colonel Mitchell's reports provided the detailed intelligence that allowed us to disrupt this plot before it could be executed. Her work has prevented what could have been the deadliest attack on a military installation in recent history. The terrorist plot that Sarah had uncovered involved multiple operatives who had been conducting their own surveillance of Fort Mitchell security protocols. Her position at the base gate had allowed her to identify these individuals and track their activities without arousing suspicion. General Crawford revealed that the community's efforts to remove Sarah from her position had actually been encouraged by hostile intelligence operatives who recognized her as a potential threat to their plans. The town council meeting was being monitored by terrorist operatives who were hoping to use civilian complaints as cover for eliminating our surveillance capability. The irony that Sarah's critics had been unknowingly supporting terrorist objectives created a profound sense of guilt among the base personnel who learned the truth. Their failure to recognize her value had nearly compromised the security of their own installation. General Hayes explained that Sarah's work had been part of a classified program that placed undercover operatives at vulnerable military installations across the country. Colonel Mitchell's success at Fort Mitchell has served as a model for similar operations at other bases, extending her protective impact to thousands of additional military personnel. The revelation that Sarah's methods were being replicated at other installations demonstrated the broader significance of her 8-year assignment. Her sacrifice had not only protected Fort Mitchell, but had also contributed to a revolution in military security protocols. General Thompson revealed that Sarah's cover had been so effective that enemy operatives had actually attempted to recruit her for intelligence gathering against Fort Mitchell. Colonel Mitchell's ability to maintain her cover while gathering intelligence about hostile activities demonstrated tradecraft at the highest level of professionalism. The final revelation was perhaps the most shocking of all. General Crawford announced that Sarah's work had been recognized at the highest levels of government, and that she had been selected to receive the Medal of Honor for her 8 years of service at Fort Mitchell. Colonel Mitchell's sacrifice, dedication, and effectiveness have earned her the nation's highest military decoration. The news that Sarah would receive the Medal of Honor for her undercover work created a profound sense of awe among everyone who learned the truth. The woman who had been criticized and scorned by the community was actually one of the most heroic figures in modern military history. The generals concluded their briefing by explaining that Sarah's story would eventually be declassified and shared with the public as an example of extraordinary service and sacrifice. Her 8-year vigil at Fort Mitchell would become a legend in military intelligence circles, inspiring future generations of operatives to similar dedication. The transformation of Fort Mitchell's community began within hours of the general's departure, as word of Sarah's true identity spread through both military and civilian channels despite official requests for discretion. The revelation that their scorned homeless woman had actually been a decorated colonel protecting their lives created a wave of shame, remorse, and desperate attempts at redemption that would reshape the entire town of Millbrook. Patricia Hendricks had transformed from a casual complainer into a vocal activist against what she termed the homeless problem plaguing their community. Her small cafe, which relied heavily on military personnel for business, became the unofficial headquarters for mounting complaints about Sarah's presence. During the morning rush, when off-duty soldiers would stop for coffee and breakfast, Patricia would regale anyone who would listen with her theories about how Sarah was damaging the area's reputation and economic prospects. "Look at her out there," Patricia would say, gesturing toward the base entrance visible through her cafe windows. "What kind of message does that send to visitors, to potential investors? We're trying to build a respectable community here, and she's making us look like we can't take care of our own problems." The Millbrook Town Council had initially approached Sarah's situation with reluctant tolerance, but as complaints mounted and local business owners began applying pressure, their stance hardened considerably. Council meetings that had once featured brief mentions of the homeless situation now included lengthy discussions about legal options for removing Sarah from her position. The council hired a legal consultant to research municipal ordinances that might apply to her case. Mayor Robert Stevenson, who had previously taken a hands-off approach to Sarah's presence, found himself under increasing political pressure from constituents who viewed her as a symbol of government ineffectiveness. His upcoming re-election campaign was already facing challenges, and the perception that he couldn't handle a single homeless person was becoming a liability that his opponents were eager to exploit. "We've been patient," Mayor Stevenson declared during a particularly heated town council meeting. "We've tried to be compassionate. But compassion without boundaries becomes enablement, and we cannot allow one person's problems to become the entire community's burden." The military leadership at Fort Mitchell faced their own mounting pressure to address Sarah's presence. Complaints from local civilian authorities were creating diplomatic tensions that affected the base's relationship with the surrounding community. Colonel Morrison found himself fielding calls from the mayor's office, the Chamber of Commerce, and various business leaders who demanded military action to resolve what they saw as a public relations problem. General Patricia Williams, the regional commander responsible for Fort Mitchell's operations, had received formal complaints through official channels that required documented responses. The paperwork generated by Sarah's presence had become a significant administrative burden, with multiple departments forced to dedicate time and resources to addressing civilian concerns about a single individual who wasn't technically violating any regulations. "This is becoming a distraction from our primary mission," General Williams told her staff during a strategic planning meeting. "We have soldiers to train, operations to conduct, and security to maintain. We cannot continue to allocate resources to managing civilian complaints about someone who isn't actually breaking any laws." The base's public affairs office had been tasked with developing a comprehensive response strategy to address media inquiries about Sarah's presence. Local news stations had begun covering the story, framing it as a debate between compassion and community standards. The military found itself in the awkward position of defending their inability to remove someone from public property, while simultaneously trying to maintain positive relationships with local civilian leadership. Captain Sarah Reynolds, the base's public affairs officer, had crafted carefully worded statements that emphasized the military's respect for both civilian authority and individual rights. However, these diplomatic responses satisfied neither the critics who wanted immediate action nor the few supporters who advocated for Sarah's right to remain in her chosen location. The legal complexities surrounding Sarah's situation had created a bureaucratic nightmare for multiple agencies. The base's legal counsel had researched military regulations that might apply to her case, while civilian attorneys explored municipal ordinances and state laws that could potentially be used to force her relocation. The consensus among legal experts was that removing Sarah would require creative interpretation of existing regulations or the passage of new ordinances specifically targeting her situation. Deputy Torres found himself caught between his professional assessment that Sarah posed no legitimate threat and the political pressure from his superiors to find a legal justification for her removal. His reports consistently noted that she had never been involved in any criminal activity, had always been cooperative with law enforcement, and had actually provided valuable information on several occasions. However, these positive assessments were overshadowed by the growing chorus of complaints from influential community members. The opposition to Sarah's presence had taken on increasingly personal tones, with some critics questioning her mental state, her motives, and her right to occupy public space. Social media groups dedicated to cleaning up Millbrook had formed, sharing photos of Sarah and speculating about her background. These online discussions often devolved into cruel commentary about her appearance and circumstances, reflecting the community's growing intolerance for her continued presence. Dr. Margaret Foster, a local psychiatrist who had no direct connection to Sarah's case, had been consulted by city officials about the potential for involuntary commitment proceedings. Her professional opinion was that Sarah showed no signs of being a danger to herself or others, the legal standard required for such action. However, the fact that such extreme measures were being considered demonstrated the extent to which opposition to her presence had escalated. The economic arguments against Sarah's presence had become increasingly sophisticated and organized. A coalition of local business owners had commissioned a study to quantify the alleged negative impact of her presence on property values and commercial activity. While the study's methodology was questionable and its conclusions were disputed by independent experts, it provided critics with what they claimed was objective evidence supporting their position. Religious leaders in the community found themselves divided on the issue. Some, like Pastor Michael Thompson from the First Baptist Church, advocated for compassion and argued that removing Sarah would be inconsistent with Christian values of caring for the less fortunate. Others, including Reverend David Clark from the Methodist congregation, expressed concern that enabling Sarah's situation was actually harming her by preventing her from seeking appropriate help. The base's chaplain, Captain Martinez, had become an unexpected defender of Sarah's right to remain at her post. His advocacy had put him at odds with some of his civilian colleagues and had created tension within the military leadership structure. His position was that Sarah's presence was a test of the community's values, and that removing her would represent a failure of both military and civilian leadership. The controversy had attracted attention from veterans advocacy groups, who saw Sarah's treatment as symptomatic of broader societal problems in dealing with former service members. These organizations had begun monitoring the situation and had indicated their willingness to provide legal support if efforts to remove Sarah escalated to formal proceedings. Local media coverage had intensified as the story gained traction on social media and attracted attention from regional news outlets. The narrative had evolved from a simple human interest story about a homeless woman to a complex examination of community values, individual rights, and the responsibilities of both military and civilian leadership. Television crews had begun conducting interviews with key figures on both sides of the debate. The mounting pressure had begun to affect Sarah's daily routine in subtle but noticeable ways. Increased foot traffic from curious onlookers and media. Representatives had made her position more visible and less comfortable. Base security had been forced to increase their presence at the main gate to manage the additional attention, creating operational complications that added to the military leadership's frustration with the situation. The climax of the opposition campaign came when the town council scheduled a formal hearing to consider emergency ordinances that would effectively make Sarah's presence at the base entrance illegal. The hearing was scheduled for the following month, with both supporters and critics expected to present their cases before a final decision was made about her fate. The conversation that would change everything began on a cold Thursday morning. In March, when Master Sergeant Rodriguez found Sarah hunched over her notebook, sketching something with unusual intensity. Instead of his typical brief greeting, he decided to sit down on the concrete barrier beside her chair, noting that she seemed more focused than usual on whatever she was drawing. Her eyes, despite the years of hardship etched around them, remained sharp and alert. While she appeared to be just another homeless veteran seeking charity, Sarah was actually conducting her own form of surveillance. She had positioned herself strategically, where she could monitor both the main entrance and the secondary access road that led to the base's administrative buildings. Her seemingly random placement was actually the result of careful calculation. Soldiers who passed her daily saw only what they expected to see: a down-on-her-luck woman holding a cardboard sign. They missed the subtle way her gaze tracked suspicious vehicles, how she mentally cataloged unusual activity patterns, and the methodical way she observed potential security vulnerabilities. Her military training, dormant but never truly forgotten, manifested in these small acts of vigilance that no one recognized. During the early morning hours, when the base was at its quietest, Sarah would pull a small notebook from her duffel bag and make what appeared to be random sketches. To anyone glancing over, these looked like the idle drawings of someone with too much time on their hands. In reality, she was documenting patterns, noting which security guards were most attentive, which entry procedures were being followed properly, and which potential weak points in the base's perimeter deserved attention. Her interactions with the soldiers were carefully calibrated. She had learned to read rank insignia instantly, adjusting her demeanor accordingly. When junior enlisted personnel passed by, she would maintain her humble posture and grateful responses. But when senior officers approached, something almost imperceptible would shift in her bearing: a subtle straightening of her spine, a slight adjustment in how she held her head. These were muscle memories from decades of military protocol, ingrained so deeply that even her current circumstances couldn't completely suppress them. Colonel James Morrison, the base's deputy commander, had noticed Sarah during his daily commute, but had never paid her much attention beyond ensuring she wasn't violating any regulations. However, on several occasions, he had caught glimpses of something in her eyes that seemed inconsistent with her apparent circumstances. There was an alertness there, a quality of attention that reminded him of seasoned intelligence operatives he had worked with during his career. Sarah's knowledge of military life extended far beyond what civilian observation could provide. She knew the significance of different vehicle markings, could identify unit designations from shoulder patches glimpsed in passing, and understood the subtle hierarchies that governed base operations. When younger soldiers would occasionally stop to chat, she would ask questions that seemed casual but actually demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of military structure and protocol. The base's intelligence officer, Major Lisa Chen, had been observing Sarah for months as part of her routine security assessments. Something about the woman's positioning and behavior had triggered her professional instincts. Sarah never appeared to be taking photographs or making detailed notes, but there was a systematic quality to her observation that suggested purpose. Beyond simple survival. She's not just sitting there, Major Chun had mentioned to her assistant during a briefing. She's watching. The question is whether she's watching for threats against the base or gathering intelligence for someone else. Sarah's daily routine included subtle security assessments that would have impressed any counterintelligence professional. She had identified blind spots in the base's camera coverage, noted inconsistencies in guard rotation schedules, and observed patterns in visitor processing that could potentially be exploited. However, instead of using this information for malicious purposes, she seemed to be using it to position herself as an early warning system. On 3 separate occasions over the years, Sarah had noticed suspicious activity that warranted attention. A photographer who had been taking pictures of the base entrance from multiple angles, a delivery truck that had made several unnecessary passes without making a delivery, and a group of individuals who had been conducting what appeared to be surveillance from a nearby parking lot. In each case, she had found subtle ways to alert base security without revealing the sophistication of her own observations. The local police had initially been skeptical of reports from the homeless woman, but Deputy Torres had learned to take her observations seriously after the photographer incident led to the discovery of a potential security threat. Sarah's tips were always accurate, always relevant, and always delivered in a way that suggested she understood the importance of maintaining operational security. Her living situation remained a mystery to everyone who encountered her. She never slept at the base entrance, disappearing each evening before the night shift arrived and returning before dawn. Various people had tried to follow her to determine where she went, but she seemed to have an uncanny ability to detect surveillance and would lose her tail within a few blocks of leaving the base. The contents of her duffel bag were equally mysterious. It appeared to contain the typical possessions of someone living on the streets: changes of clothes, personal hygiene items, and basic survival gear. However, careful observers might have noticed that her belongings were organized with military precision, and certain items suggested resources beyond what her apparent circumstances should have allowed. Sarah's medical needs were minimal, or at least appeared to be. She never seemed to suffer from the health problems that typically plagued people living rough. No obvious signs of malnutrition, substance abuse, or untreated medical conditions. Her personal hygiene, while not perfect, was surprisingly good for someone without regular access to shower facilities. These details suggested that her homeless appearance might not reflect her actual living conditions. The few times that base personnel had tried to offer her more substantial help, referrals to social services, temporary shelter, or job opportunities, she had declined with responses that were polite but firm. She seemed to have her own support system, though no one could determine what it was or how it functioned. Her refusal of assistance wasn't born of pride or stubbornness, but rather seemed to reflect a deliberate choice to maintain her current position. Dr. Walsh, the VA psychiatrist, had observed Sarah during her visits to the base and had noted behavioral patterns that suggested extensive military training. The woman's situational awareness was exceptional. Her bearing suggested leadership experience, and her interactions with military personnel displayed a familiarity with protocol that went beyond casual observation. However, Sarah had never responded to any attempts to engage her in conversation about her potential service record. The base's chaplain, Captain Robert Martinez, had made several attempts to reach out to Sarah, offering spiritual counseling and practical assistance. She had accepted his offers of conversation graciously, but had never revealed any personal information beyond her first name. During their brief interactions, she demonstrated knowledge of military chaplain services and protocols that suggested personal experience with the military religious support system. Sarah's presence had become so integrated into the base's daily routine that she was almost part of the scenery. New personnel would be briefed about her during their orientation, usually with instructions to treat her respectfully, but not to engage in detailed conversations. She had never caused any problems, never violated any regulations, and never given anyone reason to consider her a security threat. The base's medical personnel had occasionally offered to provide her with basic healthcare services, but she had consistently declined, suggesting that she had access to medical care through other channels. Her apparent good health despite her circumstances was another detail that didn't quite fit the typical profile of someone living on the streets. As the years passed, Sarah's vigil at the base gate had become legendary among the local military community. Stories about her were passed down from one unit to another, with each telling adding new details and speculation about her background. Some of these stories were accurate, others were embellished, but all of them reflected the sense of mystery that surrounded her presence. The truth about Sarah's identity and her reasons for maintaining her post at Fort Mitchell remained hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed misdirection. She had become invisible in plain sight, using society's assumptions about homelessness and mental illness to conceal her true purpose. Her 8-year vigil was about to end, but not in the way anyone expected. The criticism began gradually, starting with casual conversations in the base commissary and escalating into formal complaints that reached the highest levels of both military and civilian leadership. What had initially been mild annoyance at Sarah's persistent presence evolved into organized opposition that threatened to permanently remove her from her post at Fort Mitchell's main gate. The town council meeting was scheduled for Tuesday, March 15th, and by the preceding Friday, Sarah had vanished from her post at the base gate. Her absence created an immediate void that seemed to affect the very rhythm of Fort Mitchell's daily operations. Though most people couldn't articulate exactly what felt different about their routine, Master Sergeant Rodriguez arrived at the base entrance that Friday morning carrying 2 cups of coffee, a habit he had maintained for years. When he saw the empty spot where Sarah's chair should have been, he felt a knot form in his stomach. The piece of paper she had given him seemed to burn in his pocket as he scanned the area for any sign of her presence. The weekend passed without any trace of Sarah returning to her familiar position. Rodriguez found himself checking the gate area multiple times each day, hoping to see her weathered camping chair and faded duffel bag. By Monday morning, he was genuinely worried, not just about Sarah's well-being but about the implications of her absence for base security. Colonel Morrison noticed the change immediately, though he couldn't initially identify what was different about the base entrance. The area seemed somehow more exposed, more vulnerable, though nothing had actually changed in terms of physical security measures. It took him several hours to realize that Sarah's absence was creating a psychological impact he hadn't anticipated. Base's intelligence officer, Major Chun, had been monitoring the situation closely since Rodriguez had approached her with concerns about Sarah's background. While Rodriguez couldn't reveal the full extent of what Sarah had told him, he had shared enough information to put Major Chen on high alert. Sarah's disappearance confirmed her worst fears about the timing of potential threats. Deputy Torres received a call from the base's security office on Monday afternoon, inquiring about Sarah's whereabouts. The question caught him off guard, because he hadn't realized that military personnel were keeping track of her movements. When he explained that he had no official authority to monitor someone who wasn't violating any laws, the caller seemed unusually concerned about the response. Patricia Hendricks celebrated Sarah's absence as a victory for community standards. Posting triumphant messages on social media about how persistent pressure from concerned citizens had finally resolved the homeless problem. Her cafe saw increased business from customers who claimed they were more comfortable visiting the area now that Sarah was gone. However, not everyone shared Patricia's enthusiasm about Sarah's disappearance. Several regular customers at the cafe expressed concern about what might have happened to her, and some questioned whether the community's treatment of her had contributed to whatever circumstances had forced her to leave. Dr. Walsh, the VA psychiatrist, had been conducting her own informal assessment of Sarah's situation and was troubled by the abrupt disappearance. Her professional experience suggested that someone who had maintained such a consistent routine for 8 years wouldn't abandon it without significant cause. She began making discreet inquiries through her network of contacts in the Veterans Services community. The base's chaplain, Captain Martinez, organized a small prayer group to express concern for Sarah's well-being and to ask for guidance about the community's response to her situation. The group included several military personnel who had interacted with Sarah over the years, and their discussions revealed a pattern of respect and concern that contrasted sharply with the civilian criticism she had faced. Rodriguez found himself constantly checking the intelligence indicators that Sarah had provided, looking for signs that her fears about potential threats were materializing. The responsibility of being her backup weighed heavily on him, especially since he couldn't share the full scope of his concerns with anyone else. The first indicator appeared on Wednesday morning when Rodriguez noticed a van conducting what appeared to be surveillance of the base's delivery entrance. The vehicle matched one of the descriptions Sarah had provided, and its presence during the specific time window she had identified sent alarm bells ringing in his mind. By Thursday, Rodriguez had documented 3 separate incidents that corresponded to the threat patterns Sarah had described. He approached Major Chun with his concerns, carefully framing them as general security observations rather than intelligence derived from Sarah's briefing. Major Chun had been conducting her own analysis of potential security vulnerabilities and was alarmed by the correlation between Rodriguez's observations and her own concerns. The timing of these incidents so soon after Sarah's disappearance seemed too coincidental to ignore. The base's security posture had been subtly compromised by Sarah's absence in ways that weren't immediately apparent. Her position had provided an unobstructed view of approach routes that were now unmonitored, and her absence had eliminated a source of early warning about suspicious activity that base personnel had unknowingly relied upon. Captain Reynolds, the public affairs officer, had been fielding inquiries from local media about Sarah's disappearance. The question suggested that her absence was generating more attention than her presence had, and some reporters were beginning to investigate the circumstances that had led to her leaving. The town council meeting proceeded as scheduled, with community members gathering to discuss the ordinances that would have made Sarah's presence illegal. However, her absence had taken the wind out of the opposition's sails, and the meeting devolved into a discussion about whether the proposed regulations were still necessary. Mayor Stevenson found himself in the awkward position of having to defend ordinances targeting someone who was no longer present. The political momentum that had built around removing Sarah had dissipated, leaving him with legislation that seemed punitive rather than practical. Emma, Sarah's daughter, had begun asking questions about her mother's work schedule. Sarah had been maintaining her cover by leaving for work at normal hours and returning home in the evenings, but her extended absence from the base had disrupted this routine. Emma's growing suspicion that something was wrong added another layer of stress to an already complex situation. The investigation into Sarah's disappearance had taken on unofficial dimensions as various parties pursued their own lines of inquiry. Rodriguez was using his military contacts to gather information. Dr. Walsh was checking with VA facilities and veteran services organizations, and Deputy Torres was monitoring police reports for any sign of her whereabouts. The base's commanding officer, General Williams, had been briefed on the security concerns raised by Sarah's absence and was beginning to understand that her presence had been more significant than anyone had realized. The possibility that Fort Mitchell had been under some form of protective surveillance for 8 years without official knowledge raised serious questions about intelligence gaps in security protocols. The regional threat assessment had been updated to reflect increased concern about potential attacks on Fort Mitchell, based partly on the intelligence patterns that Sarah's absence had revealed. The timing of her disappearance in relation to these threat indicators was causing considerable alarm among security professionals. Rodriguez's analysis of the situation had led him to conclude that Sarah's disappearance was not voluntary. The precision with which she had maintained her position for 8 years suggested that only extraordinary circumstances would have caused her to abandon her post. His growing certainty that something had happened to her was complicated by his inability to share the full extent of his knowledge with investigative authorities. The community's response to Sarah's absence revealed the complexity of public opinion about her presence. While vocal critics had celebrated her departure, a significant number of community members expressed genuine concern about her well-being and regret about the treatment she had received. The search for Sarah had begun to take on urgency as security concerns mounted and the possibility of foul play became more apparent. However, the investigation was complicated by the fact that most people knew very little about her actual circumstances, and the few who suspected her true identity were constrained by security considerations from sharing what they knew. The base's security posture had been quietly increased in response to the threat indicators, but these measures were implemented without public acknowledgement of the connection to Sarah's disappearance. The delicate balance between maintaining operational security and conducting an effective search for a missing person created challenges that no one had anticipated. The event had been created specifically to honor Sarah's service and to acknowledge the thousands of intelligence operatives who serve in classified assignments that prevent public recognition of their sacrifices. Secretary of Defense Michael Harrison had personally championed the creation of this annual observance, stating that Sarah's story had revealed critical gaps in how the military honored its most dedicated servants. President Catherine Rodriguez had signed the executive order establishing National Intelligence Recognition Day, declaring that Sarah's 8-year vigil at Fort Mitchell represented the highest ideals of American service and sacrifice. The President's remarks during the signing ceremony had been broadcast worldwide, making Sarah's story a symbol of unrecognized heroism that transcended national boundaries. The international response to Sarah's story had been extraordinary. NATO allies had invited her to address their intelligence communities, and her techniques were being studied by allied nations seeking to improve their own military installation security. The British SAS had implemented a modified version of Sarah's surveillance methods at sensitive facilities, while the Israeli Defense Forces had incorporated her analytical techniques into their threat assessment protocols. The Colonel Sarah Mitchell Institute for Advanced Intelligence Studies had been established at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where future intelligence operatives would study her methods and learn from her 8-year assignment. The Institute's curriculum included courses on long-term undercover operations, civilian integration techniques, and the psychological challenges of maintaining cover while separated from family and normal social connections. Sarah's influence on military families had been profound and lasting. The Department of Defense had created new support programs for families of intelligence operatives, recognizing that children like Emma Mitchell often bore invisible burdens when their parents served in classified assignments. These programs provided counseling educational support, and community connections for military families. Dealing with the unique challenges of classified service, the ripple effects of Sarah's story continued to transform Fort Mitchell and the surrounding community. The base had become a model for civilian-military cooperation, with the town of Millbrook fully embracing its role as a military community. Property values had actually increased as the area became known for its support of veterans and military families. Patricia Hendricks had become one of the most effective veterans advocates in the region, using her business background to create sustainable programs that provided employment opportunities for transitioning service members. Her transformation from Sarah's harshest critic to her most dedicated supporter had become a powerful example of how individuals could acknowledge their mistakes and work toward redemption. The Colonel Sarah Mitchell Veterans Support Center in Millbrook had expanded to serve over 500 veterans annually, providing services ranging from job training to mental health support. The center's success had inspired similar facilities in dozens of other military communities, creating a network of support that extended Sarah's protective influence far beyond Fort Mitchell, the terrorist cell that had planned to attack Fort Mitchell had been completely dismantled through prosecutions based on Sarah's intelligence work. The trials had revealed the sophisticated nature of the plot and the critical role that Sarah's surveillance had played in preventing what could have been a catastrophic attack. The lead prosecutor had stated that Sarah's work had prevented the most significant terrorist attack on American soil since September 11th. Emma Mitchell had graduated from West Point with honors and was serving as a second lieutenant in military intelligence, following the path her mother had pioneered. Her senior thesis on innovative intelligence techniques in Homeland Security had become required reading for intelligence officers across all branches of the military. The FBI had established the Mitchell Protocol, a comprehensive framework for identifying and protecting undercover operatives who might be targeted by hostile intelligence services. The protocol included procedures for maintaining cover, supporting operative families, and coordinating between multiple agencies to ensure the safety of long-term assignments. Sarah's techniques had been incorporated into the curriculum at every major intelligence training facility in the United States. The Mitchell method of long-term surveillance had become the gold standard for protecting critical infrastructure, with operatives trained in her techniques now serving at sensitive installations worldwide. The Department of Veterans Affairs had launched the Hidden Heroes Initiative, designed to identify and support veterans who, like Sarah, had been overlooked by traditional support systems. The program had already identified thousands of veterans who had been living without proper recognition or assistance, providing them with the services they had earned through their military service. The Congressional Medal of Honor Society had created the Sarah Mitchell Award for Exceptional Service, recognizing military personnel who demonstrated extraordinary dedication in classified assignments. The award carried the same prestige as other major military decorations, but was specifically designed to honor those whose service could not be publicly acknowledged until after their assignments were complete. The international intelligence community had embraced Sarah's story as a teaching tool for demonstrating the importance of long-term strategic thinking in counter-terrorism operations. Her ability to maintain cover while gathering critical intelligence had redefined how allied nations approached the protection of sensitive military installations. The town of Millbrook had become a destination for military families and veterans seeking a supportive community environment. The transformation that had begun with Sarah's revelation had created a culture of recognition and appreciation that attracted service members from across the country. The Defense Intelligence Agency had established the Mitchell Fellowship Program, providing full scholarships for college students interested in careers in military intelligence. The program emphasized the importance of service, sacrifice, and the willingness to work in anonymity for the protection of others. Sarah's story had inspired numerous books, documentaries, and academic studies examining the role of intelligence. operatives in modern warfare. Her willingness to sacrifice her reputation and comfort for the safety of others had become a case study in military ethics and professional dedication. The base chapel at Fort Mitchell had been renamed the Colonel Sarah Mitchell Memorial Chapel, serving as a place of worship and reflection for military personnel and their families. The chapel's dedication ceremony had been attended by religious leaders from multiple faiths, all recognizing Sarah's service as an example of selfless dedication to protecting others. The annual Sarah Mitchell Recognition Ceremony had become one of the most important events in the military calendar, drawing attendees from around the world who came to honor not only Sarah's service but also the thousands of other intelligence operatives who serve in classified assignments. The long-term impact of Sarah's story on military culture had been transformative. Her example had inspired a generation of intelligence operatives to view their service as a sacred trust, understanding that their willingness to serve in anonymity was itself a form of heroism worthy of the highest recognition. The legacy of Sarah's 8-year vigil at Fort Mitchell continued to grow, inspiring new generations of military personnel to embrace service in all its forms. Her story had become a permanent part of American military heritage, ensuring that future generations would understand the importance of recognizing and honoring those who serve in the shadows to protect the light of freedom. The Colonel Sarah Mitchell Foundation had grown into a major veteran support organization, providing assistance to thousands of military families affected by classified assignments. The foundation's annual budget exceeded $50 million, all dedicated to supporting the invisible heroes who serve their country in ways that often go unrecognized. Until long after their service has ended, the call to action that emerged from Sarah Mitchell's story resonated far beyond the military community, inspiring a nationwide movement to recognize and support the invisible heroes who serve in communities across America. What had begun as one woman's 8-year vigil at a military base gate had evolved into a cultural transformation that challenged fundamental assumptions about service, sacrifice, and the true meaning of heroism. The National Hidden Heroes Initiative, launched by Congress in direct response to Sarah's story, became the largest veterans identification and support program in American history. Within its first year, the initiative had identified over 50,000 veterans who had been living without proper recognition or assistance, many of whom had been dismissed or overlooked by their communities due to misconceptions about their circumstances. The black sedan with government plates pulled up to Fort Mitchell's main gate at exactly 0800 hours on Friday morning, 1 week after Sarah's disappearance. The vehicle moved with the purposeful precision of an official convoy, its tinted windows reflecting the morning sun as it approached the security checkpoint. The base guards, accustomed to routine traffic, immediately recognized that this arrival was different from the usual flow of military and civilian vehicles. 3 men in dark suits emerged from the sedan with synchronized movements that spoke of military training and high-level authority. Their bearing was unmistakably that of senior officers, though they wore civilian clothing that couldn't quite conceal their command presence. The lead figure, a tall man with silver hair and steel gray eyes, approached the security checkpoint with the confidence of someone accustomed to immediate access to restricted areas. General Marcus Thompson, Department of Defense Intelligence, the lead figure announced, presenting credentials that caused the security guards to straighten to attention. "I need to speak with your commanding officer immediately. This is a matter of national security priority." The second man, shorter but equally imposing, identified himself as General Patricia Crawford from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Her credentials carried the same weight as Thompson's, and her presence alongside him indicated that whatever had brought them to Fort Mitchell was of significant importance to multiple branches of military intelligence. The third figure introduced himself as General Robert Hayes from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. His appearance at a relatively small installation like Fort Mitchell was unprecedented. and his presence suggested that the situation had reached the highest levels of military command. Structure. The base's commanding officer, Colonel Morrison, received the call from the security checkpoint with a mixture of surprise and concern. The arrival of 3 generals without advance notice was highly unusual, and their request for an immediate meeting indicated that Fort Mitchell had become involved in something far beyond routine military operations. The generals were escorted to Colonel Morrison's office within minutes of their arrival, their movement through the base causing a stir among personnel who recognized the significance of such high-ranking visitors. The speed and urgency of their arrival suggested that whatever had brought them to Fort Mitchell couldn't wait for normal bureaucratic channels. General Thompson took the lead in explaining their presence, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with matters of national importance. Colonel Morrison, we're here about a woman who has been conducting surveillance operations in the vicinity of your base for the past 8 years. We have reason to believe she may be in immediate danger. The revelation that Sarah had been conducting official surveillance operations hit Colonel Morrison like a physical blow. For 8 years, his installation had been under some form of protective watch by intelligence operatives, and neither he nor his staff had been aware of the operation. General Crawford continued the briefing, her tone indicating the seriousness of the situation. Agent Sarah Mitchell has been operating under deep cover as part of a joint intelligence operation designed to protect critical military installations from terrorist threats. Her disappearance 1 week ago has triggered the highest level of security alerts across multiple agencies. The name Agent Sarah Mitchell resonated through the room with stunning impact. Colonel Morrison realized that the homeless woman who had been sitting outside his base for 8 years was not only a trained intelligence operative, but also shared the same surname as the installation itself. General Hayes provided additional context that explained the scope of the operation. Agent Mitchell volunteered for this assignment after intelligence agencies identified credible threats against Fort Mitchell. Her family name was considered an operational advantage, as it provided natural cover for her extended presence in the area. The generals explained that Sarah's cover as a homeless veteran had been meticulously constructed to provide her with the perfect observation post while remaining invisible to potential threats. Her position at the base gate had given her unparalleled access to intelligence about suspicious activities and potential security breaches. Agent Mitchell has been our primary early warning system for this installation, General Thompson continued. Her reports have prevented at least 3 potential attacks over the past 8 years, and her intelligence gathering has been crucial to our understanding of regional threat patterns. Colonel Morrison struggled to process the implications of what he was hearing. The woman his community had criticized and tried to remove had actually been one of the most important security assets Fort Mitchell possessed. Her disappearance represented not just a personal tragedy, but a critical breach in the base's protective shield. General Crawford revealed that Sarah's extraction from her position had been forced by circumstances beyond her control. Agent Mitchell's cover was compromised last week when hostile intelligence operatives identified her as a potential threat to their planned operations. She was forced to abandon her position to avoid capture. The timing of Sarah's disappearance in relation to the town council meeting was not coincidental, the generals explained. Enemy operatives had been monitoring the community's efforts to remove her and had planned to use the political pressure as cover for their own operations against her. General Hayes provided details about the immediate threat that had necessitated Sarah's emergency extraction. Intelligence intercepts indicated that hostile forces were planning to eliminate Agent Mitchell before proceeding with an attack on this installation. We had less than 24 hours to get her to safety. The revelation that Sarah's life had been in danger while the community was complaining about her presence created a profound sense of irony and guilt among the base personnel who had been briefed on the situation. Their failure to recognize her true role had inadvertently contributed to the threats she faced. General Thompson explained that the operation to extract Sarah had been complicated by the need to maintain her cover while ensuring her safety. We couldn't simply remove her from her position without raising suspicions among hostile observers. The extraction had to appear natural and unrelated to any security concerns. The generals revealed that Sarah's intelligence work had extended far beyond simple observation. She had been conducting sophisticated analysis of threat patterns, developing profiles of potential attackers, and maintaining communication with multiple intelligence agencies through encrypted channels. General Crawford provided background on Sarah's qualifications for the assignment. Agent Mitchell is a 15-year veteran of military intelligence with extensive experience in counter-terrorism operations. Her psychological profile indicated that she was uniquely suited for the demands of long-term undercover work. The scope of Sarah's sacrifice became clear as the generals explained the personal costs of her assignment. For 8 years, she had endured public criticism, social isolation, and physical discomfort while maintaining her cover and protecting the base from threats that most people never knew existed. General Hayes revealed that Sarah's daughter, Emma, had been unaware of her mother's true assignment throughout the 8-year operation. Agent Mitchell maintained her cover even within her own family, creating an elaborate fictional employment history to explain her daily absences and unusual working conditions. The intelligence value of Sarah's work had been extraordinary, the generals explained. Her position had provided insights into security vulnerabilities that formal assessments had missed, and her reports had influenced security protocols at military installations across the country. General Thompson announced that Sarah's cover had been permanently blown and that she would not be returning to her position at the base gate. Agent Mitchell's 8-year assignment has concluded, and she is currently in protective custody while we assess the ongoing threat situation. The generals requested Colonel Morrison's assistance in managing the transition from Sarah's covert protection to more conventional security measures. The loss of her intelligence gathering capabilities would require significant adjustments to the base's security protocols and threat assessment procedures. General Crawford explained that Sarah's work had been part of a larger program designed to protect critical military installations through innovative surveillance techniques. Agent Mitchell's success in this assignment has provided valuable insights that will benefit military security operations worldwide. The meeting concluded with the general's request for complete discretion about Sarah's true identity and the nature of her work. The security implications of revealing her background extended far beyond Fort Mitchell and could compromise ongoing operations at other installations.